So in the couple of weeks now since starting testosterone, actually, I have had a couple, actually specifically two, really fascinating interactions with people. In one case, it was a cis gay man, and we were speaking with each other at a party. And in the other instance, that was actually the day that I started T. And the other instance was actually just this morning with a distant acquaintance of mine who was, I guess, bisexual or fluid, cis man who I was had a conversation with on Facebook actually. So very different individuals, very different sort of mediums, but in each case, I was speaking with a cis guy who was somewhere on the LGBT spectrum who I really didn't know very well. And I noticed that like there were some striking similarities with each of these interactions. Each of them were involved much more personal questions directed at me than I've ever actually had in the past. Like I've been amazed since coming out how infrequently actually I've been asked questions like about my genitals or about very specific things about my medical history, my sexual orientation, that sort of things. And each of these conversations involved quite a few questions to sort of that sort of vein. So that was really interesting for me. And like I said, just a new experience. The other fascinating shared thing between these two interactions was that after or sort of at some point in our conversation, both of my interlocutors actually shared with me some deeply personal aspects of their experience. In one case, like this guy's whole history of struggling to come out to his family. He was very conservative and everything, and also related to his partner's HIV status, like because he was HIV positive, and some of this person's anxieties and experiences with that. In the other case, this whole long saga of how this guy had been attracted to a guy at a young age, and like basically had retained this attraction to him like throughout his entire life, and expected that he always would, and was like wondering if anyone would ever understand sort of his feelings for this person, or if his feelings would ever fade, and just basically a lot of deeply personal things. In both cases, they just kind of took me a little bit off guard. But I also struggled in each case, like even while I was being asked like rather very personal questions. Like I struggle whether to feel more offended or sort of more understanding, or actually just sometimes amused, particularly in the case with the guy I interacted with at the party. It's just honestly his kind of like amazement at like the entire situation and how novel everything was for him just struck me as very funny. Like I don't know, all of his interactions with me is kind of like it was all so unreal for me that I actually found it like outright amusing. So there was a lot of in each case sort of struggle with sort of how do I even receive this? And to make things even more confusing, I feel like in each of these cases there was also kind of like almost a flirtatious dynamic on their part, or they were seeing it on mine, and so that just confused things even more beyond what they would have been. So as I say, a whole mix of emotions even in the moment. And I've also been struggling with sort of afterwards how to interpret sort of what happened, or like why they sort of chose to share things about their own lives with me. I'm wondering, like, is it a result of them having asked me some very personal questions and wanting to reciprocate that somehow? Is it is it that they somehow feel more safe addressing these things with me for whatever reason, because I'm trans? Because I'm also gay, I don't know. I don't know why they would choose to disclose some of those things. But I'm just being really struck by that right now. I find myself kind of wondering if I'll like increasingly be like encountering these kind of scenarios in the future, and like if so, how I want to respond to them. If this will just sort of become a recurring feature in my life. I feel like if this is somehow related to sort of the fact that both of the people I was speaking with were gay men, I wonder if that may be sort of an indicator of what I may face in the future, as I do hang out a lot in queer circles, not all of which are totally trans. So yeah, I mean, I think it would be really interesting to sort of see. I personally don't mind so much, I guess, at least at this point, sharing that information and, to some extent, sort of serving, I guess, as, an ear, to hear these people out if they want to share those things with me too. I don't really mind that. I have tried to reiterate though in the conversations that I've had so far, that not all trans people have exactly the same level of comfort with disclosing a lot of that, and just being like, those are sensitive questions, so while I don't mind sharing, like, you may want to sort of think about how you address these things with future trans people that you may be talking to. But it's also just gotten me thinking a lot about the dynamics of coming out, of disclosing things, and sort of how we think about how we frame these conversations that cis people have with trans people, and how we frame sort of the questions that they ask and sort of the ways that they interact with us. I feel like maybe this is a related issue. Just as with coming out, people tend to group that into, when you come out, one of two things happen. Either you're accepted or you're rejected. Like, either everybody's totally on board and you're fine, yes answer, or didn't work out so well, I face serious consequences, negative answer. I feel like people really like to simplify that model, when in reality, there are so many different things that can happen when you come out. There can be short-term consequences, there can be long-term consequences, there can be discomfort, there can be anger, there can be misunderstanding, there can be misinformation, there can be misperceptions, there can be pain, there can be like joy, there can be relief, there can be acceptance, there can be, tolerance versus excitement versus love. There's so many, and there can be such a mix of all of these things that happen, and probably millions more that I'm not thinking of right now. It's so dependent on the individual people involved, what time they're at their lives, the circumstances of how this happens, and all of that, right? And I guess, this is a form of disclosure, but it's similar when people tend to say that question was either appropriate or not appropriate, or like, I don't know, like, that's the right way to interact with the trans person or a disrespectful way to interact with the trans person. Like, these kind of situations I find myself in are very ambivalent, and I really don't know what to make of them exactly. On the one hand, like, they're reciprocal in a way in that the person is sharing as much information as they're asking. They're possibly invasive, but also often framed in terms of, I really hope this isn't a disrespectful thing to say, or you don't have to answer if you don't want to, and yet they continue to ask things that are quite personal, so it's like they're acknowledging the sensitive nature of the questions even as they're continuing to ask the sensitive questions, so and they often there be such supportive things interspersed with such strange things that I don't know how to characterize the interaction as a whole. So that's all I wanted to say. It's not necessarily that I'm saying that you can't make those calls at any point. Like, perhaps other people even find these situations somewhat different and find them easier to categorize in terms of that was respectful or that was appropriate or that was disrespectful and inappropriate. But I'm having trouble like categorizing most of the experiences I have. They just kind of happen. So I'm trying to be of the attitude that assuming that people are coming from a good place, even when they ask things that are quite personal, and I try to I just kind of roll with the punches, partly out of, compassion and trying to be understanding from where people are coming from, even if it means that I put myself in a vulnerable situation, or if I sort of let them take advantage of their privilege for a minute, just because I'm trying to be compassionate, and partly because I'm just so darn curious what is going to come out of their mouths next. Like, it's just such a fascinating interaction, that you can have with people in that circumstance. So I kind of, at least for the moment, I'm viewing it as kind of like a, half learning opportunity for them, but also a learning opportunity for me. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's a lot that I can sort of learn from these situations or gain, or, strategies to address future conversations I have with people and such. And it's just, like I say, it's just so interesting that, and sometimes amusing, that I find myself not always minding. Again, that's not always to say that people have to have the same comfort level with these things, but for the time being, I'm just finding it just like such a unique experience that I'm going to try to roll with it and see how things turn out. Anyway, that's just kind of my thoughts on the matter. Perhaps you have thoughts as well. Please share.